the night the black-eyed children came to Oakwood Acres. Halloween in the suburban neighborhood of Oakwood Acres had always been an enthusiastically celebrated event. In the days leading up to October 31st, families embraced the opportunity to thoroughly decorate their modest single-story homes with fake cobwebs strewn across bushes, cardboard gravestones placed strategically on front lawns, and most prominently, expertly carved jack-o'-lanterns with flickering candles lining front porches to greet eager trick-or-treaters. Parents helped their children for weeks in advance to prepare the perfect costumes, whether meticulously hand-stitching outfits, collecting materials for special effects makeup, or searching costume shops for that last key prop or accessory to complete the look. For the kids of Oakwood Acres, the creativity and community of Halloween was often the highlight of the entire fall season. For 12-year-old Trevor Walsh, this particular Halloween was even more anticipated than usual. It would be the first since his family moved to the new neighborhood of Oakwood Acres. Trevor and his friends had worked tirelessly perfecting their zombie costumes, using torn, ragged clothing smeared with fake blood and makeup to mimic flesh in different stages of grisly decay. They had heard from classmates that Oakwood Acres was the best neighborhood for candy harvesting. Trevor could hardly contain his eager excitement as darkness fell over the tree-lined streets on Halloween night and hordes of children slowly emerged from front doors to commence trick-or-treating under the glow of porch lights. Parents with smaller children went door to door collecting candy, while unsupervised groups of older kids took to their pre-planned routes. Conversations and laughs echoed down sidewalks amidst gleeful shrieks of excitement as Halloween festivities kicked off. But about an hour into the bustling night, a sudden series of abrupt blackouts inexplicably swept across sections of Oakwood Acres, interrupting the lively scene by plunging pockets of the neighborhood into total darkness. Most parents remained unfazed, assuming a fallen electrical line or blown transformer was the simple culprit to explain the power failures. They ushered their costumed children to safety on lit porches, expecting power to return shortly so the prized candy hunting could resume. But amidst the disruption, an unsettling undercurrent of dread began permeating the neighborhood as ominous knocking sounds started echoing up and down streets wherever the darkness had fallen. The insistent, incessant banging arose without warning, jumping randomly between houses. Adults handing out candy froze and stood listening in confusion and growing fear at the mysterious pounding seemingly coming from multiple front doors at once. Wide-eyed children fell silent, picking up on the ominous vibe descending over their previously jubilant trick-or-treating. From her living room, illuminated only by a few flickering candles, Megan Dalton tensed up as the frantic knocking erupted at her own front door. Gingerly, she gripped the large bowl of candy on the coffee table, slowly rising to approach the incessant banging. She figured mischievous kids were taking advantage of the blackout, but she couldn't shake an instinctive feeling of dread. Her fingers trembled as she unlocked the door. Swinging it open, Megan found herself facing not rowdy teens, but two small children standing eerily still on her doorstep. Their faces were completely obscured by large hoods, leaving their features cast in disturbing shadow. In perfect bizarre unison, both children tonelessly cried, "Trick or treat," holding open empty pillowcases expectantly. Confused, Megan forced a polite smile, though her unease grew. She dutifully grabbed handfuls of candy and dropped them into their waiting bags. "Aren't you just the scariest little creatures?" Megan said with exaggerated enthusiasm. As she started closing the door, anxious to end the encounter, one child abruptly looked up, pinning her with his unseen gaze. Megan stumbled backwards with a gasp, the candy bowl slipping from her fingers and spilling onto the floor. She froze in horror, unable to process what she was seeing. The child's eyes were entirely black from corner to corner. No visible pupils, irises, or sclera, just fathomless dark voids where eyes should be. "You have to let us in," the black-eyed child droned in a chilling, robotic tone. "It's not safe for us out here." Heart pounding, Megan slammed the door with trembling hands, leaving the otherworldly children outside on her porch. Their disturbing chant continued as small fists pounded the door. "Please, let us in! Please, let us in!" Similar encounters played out up and down the shadowy streets wherever the power had failed. Adults brave enough to open their doors found themselves paralyzed by black-eyed young faces gazing up and pleading tonelessly for entry. Those who refused felt helpless as the persistent children lingered outside, chanting their bone-chilling refrain. Throughout Oakwood Acres, fear and confusion reigned. Adults rushed terrified children inside, locking doors that proved useless against the relentlessness of the soulless callers. As frantic calls flooded the local police station, patrol cars raced around the neighborhood but found no remaining signs of the unnatural visitors. The power eventually returned, but a lingering pall remained over Oakwood Acres. By morning light, chilling accounts were exchanged over fences and on street corners as the community tried grasping what had transpired Halloween night. Young Trevor himself only heard secondhand stories, having been out trick-or-treating far from the disturbed area. But it was clear no rational explanation sufficed to make sense of the shared encounter with the black-eyed children. In the following weeks, parents restricted kids close to home, deeply unsettled that the bizarre incident seemed an ominous warning. When scattered power outages again plunged pockets of the neighborhood into darkness, the eerie chant would precede the emergence of the black-eyed children lingering under streetlights. "Let us in, or we'll stay forever." Their sporadic appearances offered no answers, only amplifying the unsettling mystery of their presence in Oakwood Acres. And as days shortened toward another Halloween, a question lingered. Would the black-eyed children return again to bring their darkness? Come closer, and I'll tell you a chilling tale passed down through generations in this town, of the haunted oak deep in the forest and the tortured spirit it harbors. On a barren hill, past the crooked creek and abandoned mill, stands a massive oak tree, its gnarled limbs twisted like disfigured arms writhing in agony against the night sky. No leaves adorn its warped boughs, only knots and gnarls. The oak is ancient, but its haunting began centuries ago on one wind-lashed Halloween Eve. As thunder cracked and rain poured down, a lone traveler hurried through the woods, seeking shelter from the storm. Lightning. Illuminating his path, he spotted the oak ahead, its broad branches promising refuge. Exhausted, he crawled beneath the tree, unaware of the true evil lurking within. For just then, a horrific thunderclap shook the ground and dislodged heavy boughs that came crashing down, pinning the man helplessly into the muddy earth. He wailed in pain and fear, but his cries were lost in the shrieking wind. Trapped and alone, his life slowly slipped away as the oak's twisted limbs clawed at the night sky above, indifferent to his suffering. By morning, the traveler lay lifeless, his face frozen in a look of utter terror. But unable to move on, his spirit remained, captured by the massive oak that had sealed his doom. Since then, every Halloween, the ghost emerges even paler than before, compelled to relive its anguish over and over. It crawls down the trunk amidst unearthly shrieks, said to chill the blood of any listener. Few now tread near that part of the woods, for the ghost's pain can be heard on cold October nights, haunting the bare hills. But one Halloween, lured by local legend, a group of foolish friends ignored all warnings and ventured towards the forest in search of the oak. As the moon rose high, their route took them past gnarled trees and through strange shadows. The wind picked up, howling through warped branches that grabbed at their coats like clawed hands. From the thicket ahead, they spied a clearing, and at its center, the massive oak. Even in the pale moonlight, its gnarled limbs appeared more hideous up close, twisting violently as if writhing in agony. The group uneasily inspected the tree, jumping at every creak and groan. Then, before their eyes, a ghostly face materialized amidst the branches, unleashing an unearthly wail that chilled their souls. The apparition crawled towards them, limbs unnaturally contorting. They fled for their lives, but no matter how fast they ran, the spirit followed, screaming with rage and anguish. It chose its victims randomly, vanishing only to reappear closer behind. Many were driven mad by its shrieks, until finally the remaining few escaped the living nightmare, their lives forever scarred. On cold Halloween nights, distant shrieks still echo through the woods, as the ghost endlessly relives its pain. All in this town know to avoid that wicked oak, or risk joining the lost souls who dwell within. So heed this warning, and do not tread where the apparition still lingers. The quiet town of Poplar bustled with excitement on Halloween night. Main Street was adorned with elaborate decorations to celebrate the spooky holiday. Intricately carved jack-o'-lanterns with flickering candles lined the sidewalks, while fake cobwebs and plastic skeletons hung from streetlights. Families walked up and down the roads, children dressed in colorful costumes eager to go trick-or-treating as the sun began to set. Among the crowd of excited, costumed children ran teenager Silas, who was on a mission to investigate the legend of the Phantom Trickster. The trickster was a mysterious figure shrouded in myth, said to reveal itself only on Halloween night to pull sinister pranks on the unsuspecting townspeople. According to legend that had been passed down through generations, the trickster's tricks grew progressively more dangerous and sinister over the decades it has tormented the town. But no one truly knew the full truth behind the legend, or understood the trickster's motives. Silas was fascinated by the legend, and had spent weeks planning how he would try to spot the trickster on Halloween night. As darkness fell over the town and the first stars began to speckle the night sky, the first trickster sighting was reported on the edge of the woods by Old Man McGucket, who claimed he saw a dark, shadowy figure lurking behind the trees. Silas immediately dropped his trick-or-treat bag and rushed to the area McGucket described, determined to be the first one to see the phantom trickster for himself. Crouched behind a large oak tree at the clearing in the woods, Silas scanned the area carefully, listening for any unusual sounds. The full moon above provided a dim light as leaves rustled in the cool night breeze. Then, in the shadows, Silas spotted a tall, thin figure in a sweeping black cloak that seemed to blend into the darkness. The figure's face was completely obscured by a pale, ghostly mask as it turned toward Silas and let out a spine-chilling, high-pitched cackle before disappearing again into the night, as if it had never been there at all. The next day, Silas became obsessed with discovering the true identity of the phantom trickster and unmasking the ghostly figure that had lurked in the shadows. He started interviewing various elderly residents around town who claimed to have had encounters with the trickster over the past 60 years. Their stories ranged from tales of harmless mischief like stolen pumpkins and toilet-papered trees, to disturbingly sinister acts of violence like poisoned candy apples and razor blades hidden in treats. For 6 decades, the phantom trickster had apparently been haunting the town annually on Halloween night, and its tricks had grown progressively more twisted and dangerous over the years. But, oddly, Silas could find no official public records or documentation of the trickster's existence and activities. It was as if someone had deliberately wiped away all traces of the ghostly figure from history. After hitting nothing but dead ends, the town historian Old Miss Haggerty finally showed Silas a weathered, crumbling ledger she had discovered buried deep in the archives of the old town hall that contained a list of accidents and tragic deaths that had befallen certain townspeople. The handwriting was faded and difficult to make out, but Silas could just barely identify one name that stood out: Nathaniel Forsyth. Armed with this new clue, that night Silas staked out the cemetery, hiding behind the gnarled oak tree near Nathaniel's grave. He waited silently in the darkness, hoping to spot the phantom trickster who may come to visit the grave on Halloween night. As the full moon gradually rose over the horizon, an eerie, bone-chilling laugh suddenly echoed through the cemetery, making Silas jump. Out of the shadows, the tall, cloaked figure he had seen before materialized, almost floating between the weathered tombstones. Silas watched in shocked silence as the trickster slowly approached Nathaniel's grave and placed a freshly carved jack-o'-lantern with a flickering candle at the headstone before vanishing again into the night as mysteriously as it had appeared. After witnessing the phantom trickster's cemetery visit, Silas became obsessed with researching everything he could about Nathaniel Forsyth, the person whose grave the ghostly figure had marked. Poring over old town records, Silas learned Nathaniel had been a homeless orphan boy who died 60 years ago at age 13, when a group of teenagers bullying him had caused a tragic accident on Halloween night. Could Nathaniel have transformed into the phantom trickster after death, vowing to haunt the town from beyond the grave as revenge for his untimely demise? The deeper Silas dug, the more he uncovered, and he soon had multiple folders and documents spread out across his bedroom floor. Further searches through the town archives revealed old police reports and news articles about the accident that took Nathaniel's life all those years ago. The reports showed the police had ruled the events as an accidental fall and chose not to punish the teenagers involved or investigate any further. Reading those details, Silas realized the phantom trickster's increasingly dangerous pranks over the decades must be part of its ongoing revenge against the town for the injustice of Nathaniel's unresolved murder. The trickster was clearly not resting in peace, and its thirst for vengeance had only grown stronger every Halloween. As Halloween night wore on, the trickster's tricks and pranks around town escalated from harmless mischief to truly dangerous and destructive acts. More jack-o'-lanterns were smashed, trees were felled and crashed into homes, parked cars were damaged and destroyed. Then, as midnight approached, the phantom trickster drew most of the townspeople to the cemetery by lighting every candle on every grave, illuminating the area with an eerie glow. Nathaniel's ghostly visage appeared above his own grave, conjuring up flickering images of the fatal accident from years before as he cried out for justice. Caught off guard and terrified by the horrifying spectacle, the townspeople fled from the cemetery in mass panic as the trickster's malevolent laughter echoed after them. At dawn, following the dramatic midnight cemetery event, the entire town gathered in the high school gym, the residents fearful and desperate to figure out what to do about the trickster's increasingly dangerous wrath. Only Silas understood the tragic roots of the trickster's vengeance and that its thirst for revenge came from a place of deep pain and injustice. He knew that the pranks would never cease, and each Halloween night, they would only grow more sinister if the truth continued to stay buried like Nathaniel's body. Silas understood he needed to try and help Nathaniel's troubled spirit find peace. When night fell on the town once again, Silas ventured alone to Nathaniel's grave, determined to have one final encounter with the phantom trickster. He lit a candle beside the headstone in remembrance and then spoke aloud, telling Nathaniel he now knew the truth about what really happened to him that Halloween 60 years ago. He explained it was not Nathaniel's fault, and he should not blame himself for the reckless actions and cruelty of the teens who caused his death. As Silas spoke, the spectral trickster materialized next to the grave, seemingly listening. It tilted its head curiously at Silas's kind words, reacting differently than it had to the fear and anger of the townspeople earlier. "Your desire for revenge is justified," Silas continued, "but spreading more pain and harm to the town will not ultimately heal or resolve your suffering. Please, Nathaniel, you have done enough. It's time to forgive and rest in peace." The phantom trickster wavered, appearing to consider Silas's plea for forgiveness and resolution. Finally, it nodded silently at Silas before vanishing into the night, leaving behind only a cold chill in the air as the candle continued to flicker beside Nathaniel's grave. When Halloween night finally ended and the sun rose, there was no further sign of the phantom trickster's return. As the residents of Poplar emerged, they were relieved to find no new damage or tricks. Silas hoped it meant Nathaniel's tortured spirit had finally listened and found some sense of peace and closure. Through his dangerous adventure unraveling the mystery of the legend, Silas learned that stories handed down through generations can sometimes obscure injustice and prevent truth from being revealed. But confronting those legends head-on and chasing the real truth could help set things right, just as learning Nathaniel's story had freed the town from his haunting. In the years that followed, Silas noticed a candle was still lit at Nathaniel's grave each Halloween, left by residents who now knew his story and understood that the trickster had simply been a manifestation of his unresolved pain and untimely death. The town was never tormented by the phantom trickster again, as if his ghost had refrained to never let the tragedy of his own story and quest for justice be buried and forgotten.